Welcome to our last breakout session of the day. Thank you for being here. It's been quite a day. My name is Jim Heiger. I'm the chair of the San Francisco Jewish Federation and a proud sponsor of the Z3 conference, along with my wife. It has been. I hope you have gotten as much as I have out of all of these incredible speakers and the fact that we brought so many people together from Israel and frankly from all over the world to be with us, for this very special conference. A couple of things before we get started. I just ask you again to silence your cell phones and remind you that when we get to the Q&A section, please keep it to questions. And then we'll have more time to hear from our speakers. I also want to remind everyone that immediately following this session, back in the tent will be our closing plenary with a very incredible panel. We're going to light the Hanukkah lights for the last night of Hanukkah, and the Maccabees are going to join us for some songs. So on to the last discussion of the day, and our topic for this session is, should world Jewry have a voice in the peace process? Israel's future, not just its security, but its very nature, is inevitably shaped by Israeli-Palestinian relations. For decades, the existential importance of this matter has meant that it has been treated as an internal issue for Israel. But the reality is that Jews outside Israel have been extensively involved on all political sides. And this session right now is going to explore the place of world Jewry in shaping Israel's destiny in this particular area. So our panelists today, we're very pleased to have with us Ambassador Dan Shapiro, who was the former U.S. ambassador to Israel under President Obama, Dr. Yoaz Hendel, who is an Israeli military historian, author, and regular commentator for Yediot Ahronot, and David Halperin, who is the executive director of the Israel Policy Forum. Our moderator for this afternoon is Dr. Anita Friedman, a friend and someone that I look up to as a mentor and colleague here in the Bay Area. She is president of the Correct Foundation. She's the CEO of the Jewish Family and Children's Services here in the Bay Area and an AIPAC national board member. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Anita. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And let's thank Jim for being such an extraordinary leader. Also, like many of us do, Jim wears many different hats. But like many of us, he's on the job for the Jewish people. And that's what really matters. So thank you, Jim. And thank you to our panelists. Thank all of you. I know so many of you who are here, which is a pleasure, and so many of you are new, and I've met so many new people, and it's just very inspirational to me that all of you have come together with all the differences among us. I mean, the differences among us run very deep and very, very strong, but more importantly, what we care about runs much deeper and much stronger and has brought us together here from around the Bay Area and from around California and from around the United States and even from around the world. And that is a blessing on the last night of Hanukkah and any day. So thank you. I'll just say a few comments to start us off, and then I'm going to ask each of our panelists to take 8-10 minutes to kind of comment on this very interesting question and probably on other related questions. And then we will open it up also for questions and have a conversation with the panel. The word abyss has been used often at this particular conference, more often than usual. Did you notice that? Like Danny Gordis used abyss. He quoted from a speech from David Ben-Gurion, who used the word abyss. Abyss in Hebrew is, translate, what's it? Abyss in Hebrew.
Instead of
בור ללא תחתית.
Yeah.
Meaning like
a bottomless pit.
Like a bottomless pit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. So somehow abyss seems to be like a theme here, And it's funny because it reminds me once I was introduced not too long ago. It's like just a short little story, because a lot of times when I do speaking, people botch the introduction, you know? And so this woman was introducing me, and you know, you have to find something nice to say when you're introducing people, right? You always have to find something nice to say. So she says, I want to introduce Anita Friedman. You know, yesterday we stood at the edge of an abyss, but now with her leadership, we're about to take a great leap forward. You know, I didn't think that came out right either. Did that come out right? No. So we're going to talk about the abyss, or the non-abyss. We had a conversation earlier. How many of you were with me earlier in our earlier session? So some of you heard some of my comments about this. I'll make some comments for the rest of you who didn't. But we, I think, all understand that our goal is to help the Jews of the world understand that our individual fates are linked to our collective fate. That our individual fates are linked to our collective fate. I think we all understand that at some level. So as you know, when things get really bad, we all come together. Same thing is true in this country. When things get really bad in the United States, as divisive and difficult as they are right now, we do come together when there's an existential threat, a 9/11 or a war. But short of that kind of a threat, we have a lot of issues, a lot of different worldviews, a lot of different opinions, a lot of different feelings. And the issues that Israel faces are quite different than the issues the United States faces. And so my work has been, over all these years, working both on the bridge building aspect of the U.S.-Israel relationship, the world Jewry relationship, but really focus on what's happening in the United States. And that is probably the biggest challenge in some ways, and that's our work, is to figure out how to maintain a Jewish community and an interest in being Jewish in a population that doesn't know how to answer the question about why be Jewish. You can't talk about the issue of supporting Israel, or should America have a voice in the peace process, when you have a growing population that doesn't even care about that issue, doesn't even ask themselves that question, for whom that's just not important. It is important to all of us, and it's important to the leadership of the Jewish community. And so our conversation really has to ultimately be not about our ultimate goal, about being one people, because I think we all agree about that. Even Israelis, on some level, agree that we're one people. But what are the best methods by which to get there? What do we need to do? What is to be done? Somebody else used that title once. To get us to where we need to go. What could each of you do in your lives, in the organizations that you're involved in specifically, to ever so slowly move the Jewish people in the right direction? So I want to frame this conversation a little bit larger than just about whether we should have a voice in the peace process, because I think it's a bigger issue than just whether we should have a voice in the peace process, if there were such a thing as a peace process, which, as Tal Becker always says, peace is in our dreams but not on our calendars. So I'll ask you, Ambassador, to start. When we talk about the U.S. voice in the peace process, many of our meetings have been about, in my role as a leader of AIPAC, on our views about the peace process. Right. So you, more than most people, understand this particular question.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for attending. It's good to be with you, Anita, and my fellow panelists, good friends. Let's start with one stipulation, or one statement, which I think we might be able to stipulate to. There's no peace process right now, at least in the Israeli-Palestinian context. And there's not likely to be one in the near term. The divides between the Israeli and Palestinian leaders, who totally mistrust each other, are very deep. There's a real crisis of leadership on the Palestinian side. There's a very right-wing Israeli coalition, which is not inclined in that direction for the time being. The American administration is probably going to be focused on other things. So I think, to the extent we're even having this conversation, it should be in the context of the American Jewish voice in the near term, the American Jewish community's voice in things that would keep the prospects of an eventual resumption of peace talks and a two-state solution alive until such time as some of those dynamics change. And so hopefully then we get into the real issues of the negotiation. But I just want to stipulate that up front. Everything I'll say sort of should be understood in that context and not as somebody who believes that if only tomorrow the state of Israel would take my advice, we'd have a two-state solution. That's not going to happen.
I used to think that.
Yeah, I used to think it too. So first thing is, so if the question presupposes should American Jews or world Jewry have a say in issues around the peace process, I don't like the term, around Israeli-Palestinian peace questions that is equivalent to the Israeli people's say, the answer is obviously no. The Israeli government is a democracy. It responds, as any democratic government does, to the wishes and will of its people, its voters, its citizens. And those of us who have the ability to become citizens but choose not to do so for whatever reason shouldn't expect that our voice carries more weight or even equal weight as those who are part of that society. Secondly, these are questions that deal with fundamental questions of security, other things too, identity and Israel's definition as a Jewish and democratic state, but to the extent that they really touch on security questions, one also, I think, has to appreciate that and show a little deference to people like Yoaz who have put their lives at risk in the Israeli military, his children who will be drafted, they as voters in Israeli society. There's a different sort of standing. By the way, sometimes it's misunderstood, but we bore that in mind as diplomats in my years in the Obama administration. I think it's been true of other administrations as well, that we as the United States government could come with interests and with ideas and with recommendations, but at the end of the day, the decisions were only going to be made by the Israeli government as supported by the Israeli people. So I would hope that Israelis would listen to views offered in good faith and certainly from its strongest supporters, but they're under no obligation to follow what any outsider says. But if the question is, does world Jewry have a say in these matters, meaning can they express their views on them, on matters of peace and security, the answer is quite different. I mean, we live in the era of Twitter. Who doesn't have a platform to say what they think on any issue they care about? So all of us have views, maybe. All of us have a right to express them. They're going to be expressed. And to try to stifle that conversation is, I think, sort of a silly and pointless exercise, but also it's just very, very unrealistic. I think this dynamic raises two questions for each side, and I'll just sort of mention those questions and then begin the broader conversation. I think for diaspora Jews, it raises a certain obligation to express our views, as we will on Twitter or any other forum, with a certain degree of appropriate humility. That if you really want to influence Israeli decisions, Israeli policy on these questions, we have other ways to do that, or the most significant way you can do that, of course, is to make aliyah and bring a few 100,000 of your friends and change the Israeli society from within. If you are speaking as an outsider, you have to understand you're an outsider, and that appropriate level of humility is important. And the other thing to recognize is that, and we sometimes forget, that these really do touch on critical security risks and real dilemmas. And if we're going to come with ideas, we have to address those up front. We cannot sort of assume that that'll all be taken care of, or assume it's all going to be better the day after the two-state solution and all the security questions will be resolved. Actually, IPF, which David Halperin leads, has really been a leader in this area by promoting the two-state solution, but very much focused on the question of bringing security solutions to the challenges that a two-state solution would present. And that's based on a lot of very serious work that was done during the Obama administration by General John Allen, a major American military leader, in consultation with the IDF, and a whole plan that was developed around what are the security or the professional military and security answers to the challenges that a two-state solution would present. So if we're going to have that dialogue, we should be mindful that those issues need to be addressed if we're going to be taken seriously. For Israelis, I would say the two questions that are raised are the following. One is that it is important to recognize that most, you can't say all, but most of the input that's coming from diaspora voices on this is coming out of deep love and out of deep concern and out of deep care and belief that Israel matters and that its future survival and security and Jewish and democratic identity and connection as the nation state of the Jewish people is important to us, important to the world, important to our own Jewish identity, and that's what's motivating it. So that when Israelis hear these annoying voices maybe coming from outside, the outsiders, they at least understand the motivation. I think intention counts for a lot. And there is criticism that crosses the line into delegitimization and BDS, something that I hope we will all agree on opposing. But it would be unfair and incorrect to stigmatize advocates for a two-state solution and advocate for Israeli policy in the current situation just to keep two states alive and viable for a later attempt as somehow unfriendly to Israel. In fact, those views are shared by many Israelis in politics and out of politics. Even the Prime Minister has, in his own way and in different times, such as when he gave the Bar Ilan speech, touched on some of the same ideas. So these are hardly illegitimate ideas. The last question for Israelis I think it raises is to understand and recognize that there is a risk of a change in not only diaspora Jewry's relationship to Israel, but maybe some of Israel's other international relationships, if the drift away from a two-state solution, if the drift seemingly in an inevitable, inexorable direction towards some version of a binational state, in which Israel has to make some really wrenching decisions between is it going to maintain its Jewish character primarily or its democratic character primarily, because it's very difficult to do both, that could create situations where people who currently identify very closely with Israel are also going to feel that their own values force them to make some very difficult choices. And so I hope Israel will bear that in mind as well. It may be that in its rank order preferences, it says, look, the support of diaspora Jewry is nice, the support of other democratic nations is nice, but it's less important than security, it's less important than what we define as our preferred end state given the available options. But Israel, being a mature democracy, should also have its eyes open, that there could be those kinds of implications and consequences to decisions that seem to accelerate the drift in the direction, or nothing to arrest the drift in the direction of some version of that binational state. I think I'll stop there.
Good, thank you. Everyone, hold your questions for the ambassador because we'll have a chance to talk with you. I think you have some really important observations to share, so thank you. Please.
Thank you. Allow me first of all to apologize. I'm going to repeat on two stories that I just mentioned in the last panel because I think they are important to also to understand the issue of the peace process and the war Jewry. The first time that I knew or I actually saw a Reformic Jew was when I was 21. I grew up in a small settlement 5 kilometers from the Green Line, and I knew that there are different Jews in the world, but I didn't see them at all. And even though that I was very interested in Jewish history, and I read a lot from Josephus Flavius about Isiim and Karaim after that, a lot of years after that, and I knew by heart what is the difference between Prushim and Tzdukim in the Second Temple Mount. I didn't know what is the difference between conservatives and reforms. And the first time that I saw a conservative rabbi and a reformic rabbi was when I was in officer school in Mitzpe Ramon, and the commander of chief, Elazar Stern, which is today a Knesset member, forced us to actually introduce us to different rabbis from different streams, Israelis, but it was the first time in my life that I actually understood more or less that there are other Jews and they are not so far from me, and the perspective is not that strange. Now, I'm taking a few years later, the second story that I'm going to repeat. I actually spoke in front of one of the mechinot. How to explain mechinot?
Gap year programs, pre-army gap year programs.
But of guys from one of the more religious settlements, Eli, which is one of the famous mechinot in Israel. And we talked about the balance between Jewish and democratic values. We talked about history. And I also mentioned the issue of diaspora in Israel and the Reform Jews and the conservative Jews and Orthodox and liberal Orthodox. And since I belong to a modern Orthodox community, which is a bit liberal, we spoke also about that. They came to my shul. We spoke after the Shabbat prayer. And we spoke, and then someone raised his hand and told me, look, I don't think that the reforms are really Jews. The day after, I went to Hartman Institute. The Foreign Minister office asked me to speak in front of a group of Reformic rabbis that came to Israel. And he asked me to explain them about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Why me? Because I think that my opinion belonged to a group called the liberal right in Israel, which means that I belong to the right, but I have, I would say, my opinions based on the heritage of Begin and Jabotinsky and maybe Rabbi Cook, mix of all of them together. And I explained them how I see things in a very, I thought, in a very pragmatic way, because I'm really not, I'm practice Judaism, but I'm not really religious in my views. I don't think that the Messiah will come and will bring peace or will do other things. I don't talk about voices from God. I'm talking about, as I see things, about risk management. And I explained them for 1 hour, and they asked questions. And then at the end of the discussion, someone came to me, actually the leader of this group, and told me, look, what you said, it's impossible. There is no such a thing, a liberal right. And I told him, look, it's very funny. Someone yesterday just told me that there is no such a thing as a Reform Jew. So what I'm trying to say with those two stories is that actually there is a gap between the Jewry here, the American Jews, and the Israelis, probably gaps that based on the fact that we're not really familiar with the dissonance of each other. And sometimes we see black and white. And I think that if you understand that the debate in Israel, it's about risk management. It's not about messiah things or about, there are groups that think that maybe God promised them this part or another. And there is another group that for sure believe that the Messiah is actually peace. And they can bring peace immediately if they just sing enough Imagine of John Lennon. Between them, the majority are very pragmatic in Israel. And there is a real debate. And in this debate is something very Israeli, which, of course, people from all over the world can express their feelings and understanding. The two gaps that actually we have between the Israelis, the majority, I'm trying to maybe to brand it, but the Israelis and the Jewish Americans is on politics, on our policies. And the second part, it's about church and state. And the issue of church and state, I have also a lot of criticism to my government. I think that the monopoly of the ultra-Orthodox in Israel, it's a disaster. And we have many debates inside Israel and many voices inside Israel. And you know what? The biggest fight regarding church and state, regarding the monopoly of the ultra-Orthodox, it's inside the modern Orthodox communities. They are, I would say, the strongest voices against it and pro it. You have different streams inside the modern Orthodox community in Israel. And this is an issue that, of course, this issue is important for all of us. And people from here, if they feel that Israel is the homeland for the Jewish people, of course that they need to participate somehow in the debate and to say, look, we would like to have also a piece of land, a piece of spirit in Israel, and we think that you need to accept our views, our Jewish views, and of course that they have something to say and to contribute to the discussion. The second part, which is the political issue, unfortunately today is based on a picture, an unrealistic picture. You have a huge group here that believe that their own identity as global Jews as cosmopolitical Jews that are part of John Lennon's song, without borders and without differences in religions and on, which is very Jewish to think in a biblical way. They think that they can change Israel by forcing, or by maybe forcing is a strong word, but by understanding from here what is good for Israel. And sometimes they think that if Israel is not taking the right step from their perspective, they are actually heading to the edge. There is every few weeks on the New York Times a headline that Israel is on the edge. So every few weeks we are on the edge because we didn't take the right step from their perspective.
Back to the abyss, huh?
Yeah. Now, I think that this is a part of the problem, and I truly believe that Jews from all over the world can influence on Israel. And they should influence on Israel, but they should understand Israel before they are trying to influence. And they should be more modest regarding the risk management that we are taking inside Israel. And I'm not talking only about, if it sounds, because I'm coming from the conservative camp, I'm not talking only about liberal Jews that think that tomorrow morning they should put a peace plan. As I see it, it can work only with Harry Potter or another magic stick, but they can put a peace plan and to force the Israelis. I'm also talking about conservative donors like Sheldon Adelson that thinks that he can, I don't know, he can force us to do that or that. It doesn't matter who has the money, how much money he has, and what he is planning to do. In order to influence Israel, really, first of all, yes, you need to come to Israel to be an Israeli, and this is part of it. Secondly, I think that if your son is going to the army, it's giving you some more sensitive way to understand the checks and balances in Israel. It's not only a kind of scenarios that you are not familiar with. And third, yeah, if it's in your heart and you truly believer, and this is a very Jewish thing to believe in peace and to believe in prophets and to believe in sometimes in utopic dreams. If you really want to be part of it and if you really want to influence, you can do it in a more modest way and to understand that maybe the truth is not in your package. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. So, David,
So,
should world Jewry have a voice in the peace process?
so as I feared, Dan took all my talking points. He even plugged our organization in the process. No, look, I think two thoughts on the prompt for this session. Number one is the question was should, and the descriptor was that it's a reality that there already are American Jews seeking to influence that process, and that's where I want to start, where Yoaz left off, which is let's acknowledge the reality that there is very much ongoing efforts to influence the direction of Israeli policy, happening both on the right and on the left. I would suggest, as Dan mentioned, that we absolutely do have the right to speak out on these issues, and indeed we should advocate for these issues. But ultimately, Israel, of course, has the final say on its security and the aspects of individual negotiation. Can you hear me? It's okay. Our organization, Israel Policy Forum, was started, as Yossi Balin can attest, in 1993. Not to tell the Israelis what is best for them, not to preach and suggest that we know best, but to support the government of Yitzhak Rabin, to be in a support role, to generate attention, support that was necessary for advancing Israeli ideas. And that's where I would suggest that we in the American Jewish community need to be stronger in demonstrating support for ideas in Israel that we identify with and that help to strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship as we know best. And here is where I want to talk about the impact of the peace process, or lack thereof, on the U.S.-Israel relationship. Because I would agree, as you mentioned from the outset, that a lack of connection to Judaism broadly is impacting significantly whether people care about these issues. But let's go beyond just the American Jewish community, and I'll repeat what I said in an earlier session in which I participated. We have three divides which are happening both in the Jewish community but beyond the Jewish community, in the United States at large when it comes to the subject of Israel. There's the generational divide between young and old, which are increasingly seeing Israel in a completely different way. I would suggest that divide is getting worse. We have a political divide between Democrats and Republicans. I would suggest that divide is getting worse. And in many ways, that divide overlaps with a denominational divide between observant and secular, which I would argue is increasingly getting worse. And I would suggest that for the American Jewish community to be effective advocates for Israel, and indeed for a peace process, it's not enough for us merely to go on defense. We need to be able to showcase and demonstrate that Israel is indeed pursuing peace, and to showcase and highlight those Israelis who are taking that message forward. And so it's incredibly important, I believe, to not lose sight of the goal advancing the process. I would agree with you that now is not the time to put a peace plan on the table. I suggest we should share that with the President of the United States. But I would suggest that rather than suggesting that we only go on defense, we indeed need to share with and make our voices heard with our Israeli colleagues that yes, it's important to demonstrate that there is a vision for making tomorrow better today in terms of ensuring the long-term viability of a secure Jewish and democratic state. And if we are unable to speak to that, we are going to continue to see, I believe, these divides substantially worsen. Now, that does not mean to say that our voice is going to have equal weight. Of course not. My children are not going to serve in the Israeli army, and I completely respect and understand that. But I would suggest that we need to do away with the suggestion that there are limits to what we should talk about, what we can discuss, in order to have a vibrant dialogue between the United States and the American Jewish community. In fact, that's part of the theme of this conference in many ways, is the notion that we are on an equal plane in terms of the future of Zionism, but also in terms of the notion of Jewish peoplehood. I would suggest that the next decade is going to have remarkable impacts on the Jewish story, not just the story of Israel. But yes, many of the decisions to be made are Israeli decisions. But those decisions are going to impact the future of the Jewish people, of which we all have a stake. And in that respect, I would suggest that there should be no limits on the way in which we are candid with one another. Now, there's one thing I want to share with you. A few months ago, I happened to stumble upon a storage room that we had that I didn't realize we had. We didn't realize it existed. It was 25 years worth of archives of old materials and articles and so forth. And I came across an article which I thought was so completely in line with the theme of this conference. And I'd like to read from it for you. And it comes from an American Jewish Congress symposium that was held in December of 1980. I'll give you an idea. I was born November 1980, okay? So this has been happening for quite some time. And it is an American-Israel dialogue convened by the American Jewish Congress on the subject of the right to participate in each other's affairs and the limits of that right. So we've been having the same conversation for quite some time. And what I'd like to share with you is what Abba Eban said to that group, based on this article which I found. Of course, Abba Eban, foreign minister, ambassador to the U.S. and so forth. And Abba Eban says, "I will tell you frankly that all is not well with our Jewish condition. I suggest that we should not talk to each other in diplomatic language. Let us speak with the candor of partnership. There should be nothing secretive about our conversations. I suggest a greater rigor and a greater sense of authenticity in what we have to say about one another. If our partnership is to have vitality, it must accept the premise of mutual criticism." Now, there are some in Israel who deny diaspora Jewry that right. There is a common view that diaspora Jewry should be kept immune from the turbulence and variety of Israel's political controversies. But surely the salient fact is that the free Jewish communities, like Israel, live in a democratic context. We are therefore accustomed to the idea that decisions are reached not through blind acceptance of authority, but through the interaction of alternative and contradictory choices. Those who ask world Jewry to maintain silence are relegating the diaspora to a grave loss of dignity. They are saying, in effect, that Jewish support of Israel should have a material and political, but not an intellectual dimension. If we impose this limitation, the Jewish world will slide into non-involvement, leaving the Israeli cause diminished. That is what I would suggest, I would echo today, is that we cannot afford to suggest silence to the diaspora community, which could impact the disengagement and apathy, which is a national security threat to the state of Israel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, well, you know, what this underscores is that in some ways, some things don't change. And the fact that for thousands of years, we have been so preoccupied with our death is probably one of the reasons why we've now become the peppiest, best organized, most exciting, interesting Jewish people in the history of the Jewish people. So that's the good news. Let's open it up for some questions. Long, rambling questions, yes, would be good. Yeah. Okay, please.
So on this topic, feeling very naive or uneducated, sometimes it seems to me that Netanyahu believes, and may be right in believing, that if you have enough power, if you have enough security for your own people, and I mean all of us, you have the security of all the nuclear bombs and the technology and all of it, that you will be safe, and that all this talk so pales in comparison. I'm center-left. I'm not sure he's wrong. What do you think?
Are you addressing your question to anybody in particular, or anybody on the panel? Feel free to respond.
But I actually think first and foremost, I would like to hear from you as a participant.
Good.
And
Please.
Then I think that you.
No, go ahead.
She wants to hear for the person who has an accent first.
I will repeat.
All right, I'll with your permission, I'll just say where the Prime Minister actually is reported to have made, because it was in a closed conversation, something very close to this argument just a couple of weeks ago, 3-4 weeks ago. He said, again, as reported by the media, so you can, caveat it, that many nations have occupied other nations, and as long as they were strong enough, the world didn't care. And they were able to get away with it. And that then dovetails into his well publicly stated argument that most of the rest of the world is losing interest in the Palestinian issue. That includes the Arab states and Israel's technology and its security expertise and its innovation is opening all kinds of doors and diminishing the importance of that issue. And so maybe it's not so important. And in security terms, he might be right, as you suggest, that the Palestinians are weak. They can definitely do damage. Hamas with its rockets in Gaza, other forms of terrorism, even, God forbid, another intifada, something on that scale. But, they're sufficiently weak that Israel in its current condition, and you can chart this out for decades, and able to manage some of these other relationships, might be able to do very well, at least in security terms, in that period of time. I think the concern that so many of us who can project that trajectory raise is not what are you doing for Israel's security only, and what are you doing for Israel's international relationships only, but what are you doing for Israel's own identity? Can Israel do all of those things with that security and that international standing, and remain a Jewish and a democratic state in that in that environment? And if it cannot, if it is forced at some point to make that wrenching decision between its Jewish character and its democratic character, we shouldn't be surprised if that is going to produce a diminishment of support in some quarters, and I think including in much of world Jewry, certainly American Jewish communities. So that's the worry, that then that core tenet of Zionism, of a Jewish and democratic state, is lost, even while some of those other aspects, he might be right, in this kind of dog-eat-dog world that we live in that region, Israel can get by managing the risk, but with other things being put at very significant risk.
So now to my Israeli accent. a few years ago, Dan was ambassador and I worked for Netanyahu. And I tried to understand what America wants from Israel. And
I didn't do a very good job explaining it.
yeah, and I tried to deliver some ideas from the other side.
I understood completely.
Yeah, I know, but you didn't completely answer it. He was a very good diplomat. And I think that I agree with Dan. I agree that it's not only about security, and I agree with you. We are today in our best position ever. And at the same time, I think that the Israelis today understand that we cannot ignore the fact that we have Palestinians over there. Maybe they call themselves Palestinians only in the last 50 years, but still there's something there. You can call them whatever you choose, but they are there. And at the same time, it's about checks and balances. People like me that come in from the right wing see the solutions that we had in the past to go back to 67 borders as disaster. In our risk management, this gamble can bring Israel to a very difficult situation from security perspective. Now, if the checks and balance, or I would say it like this, if the two options is to go back to 67 borders and to risk the existence of Israel, or to be very morals and to give the Palestinians a state, which, as I understand it, probably will become another dictatorship in the area, which will violate human rights, as we see today, which will not do any elections, as we see today, which will kill the freedom of speech and the freedom of press and whatever. If those are only the two options are quite bad, but I choose the options that Israel will remain safe and secured. As I see it, it's not only the two options. It's not only about going back to 67 borders, or to be a national state which exists with violating democracy and giving up on our liberal values. I think that there are a few steps in the middle. They are not perfect. They are not the utopic dreams that people thought about in the past, but they exist. And I can give you, I can speak about it a lot, but even today, you can see that this two-state solution does not exist anymore. There is an enemy state in Gaza Strip, which is one state. You have a state minus or something like that in the Palestinian Authority, and they have flag and a national anthem and monopoly on power. And I think that this is the direction. What we see today is what we have. And this is more or less the direction, or more or less the limitations that we have, right and left. And since this is the reality, and I'm trying again, it's not because God promised Abraham the land. It's because that this is how I interpret the reality. So now, from that point of view, we need to find ways to strengthen our democratic values, our liberal values. We have many problems in many aspects. If you ask me tomorrow morning, we should annex part of the territories in part, not I don't belong to the part that thinks that we need to annex everything, but part of the territories, and to give full citizenship to the Arabs that live there, that they will become Israelis. We have a few other ideas than to risk Israel or to become a binational state. And those steps, we might find ourselves forcing by others to go there, or we might find ourselves taking steps, taking decisions in the, I don't know, in a generation. But this is what we have, and this is the only, I think, reasonable way to even to debate on. And when you want to really to promote Israel, I think that you might find other ways to describe the situations and the way than the routines that we knew at the last 20 years.
Thank you. Okay, more questions, please. Yeah.
So this one's primarily for David. You talked about one, but anyone can comment. You talked about one of the fundamental three divides being Democrat versus Republican, and I'm hoping you can talk specifically about that as it comes to support for Israel. Historically, AIPAC and other organizations have talked about unwavering U.S. support for Israel as a bipartisan issue. Can you talk specifically about how that may be eroding, or if you perceive it to be eroding, between Democrats and Republicans, and how that factors into all of this?
Sure. I think that we have seen now, as Dan can attest, to the growing politicized nature of the conversation around Israel, the growing perception, I would argue, in Washington and among Democrats generally, that Benjamin Netanyahu is the Republican prime minister from Israel. I think the more...
What about Ron Dermer?
Yeah, okay, he's also a member of the GOP. And I think that so long as Israel is perceived as so clearly aligning its preference with one political party over the other, it will be fair game to view those figures as part of the opposition, and therefore you're going to see hostilities. I don't want to suggest that bipartisan support no longer exists. I think overwhelmingly Democrats continue to support Israel, but I think we need to be realistic about what's happening here at the grassroots of the party. And the growing alignment with the Republican Party, not just with Israel, but particularly with the Israeli rights, and the Democratic Party increasingly disillusioned with an Israel that has had Prime Minister Netanyahu for quite some time, whose perspectives on this issue are very clear. I mean, I don't think we should sugarcoat the reality of what is happening at sort of the grassroots levels currently in terms of how this is perceived. And frankly, I would argue, Yoaz, that if we were to see steps that would fundamentally change the nature of Israel's relationships to the Palestinians, that would remove from the table the concept of the two-state solution, recognizing that it is not available today, but to take steps to actively annex and change the map fundamentally of the Oslo Accords, which, as much as we may call Oslo Accords dead, the West Bank area A, B, and C is very much a reality, and the functionalities of the Oslo continue to govern the West Bank regime. Once you remove the basic tenets of Oslo from the West Bank by taking such a step to annex portions of the West Bank, then you are pushing the envelope towards the risk of what happens on the Palestinian side. And I don't want to suggest that that every step is a step on the abyss, right? You can't predict what may be a trigger point for fundamentally changing the reality of the current status quo, which has been quite sustainable. But I would argue that a step that would go towards healing the growing political divide is not a step towards annexing portions of the West Bank, but instead taking steps that actively preserve the concept of the goal of two states, recognizing that it may not be possible in the near term, but taking economic measures, taking security measures, taking political measures when it comes to settlement construction and the extent of that settlement construction, demonstrating that Israel is taking steps to preserve that goal, even if the current government and even if Israelis generally think that it is simply not in the cards right now or the foreseeable future. I think the aspiration of peace is critically important to Israel's story, particularly among progressives in the United States.
Yeah, I think that's important. I just want to add one thing, because you asked the question from the point of view of part of the leadership nationally of AIPAC, because it came up about the bipartisan issue and how are we moving in terms of our voice in the peace process. So everything's confidential in this room, right? Yeah, right. Nobody's going to.
Are we on live stream?
Also the camera.
nobody's going to share this information, right?
Yeah.
We already have, the world Jewry already does have a very big voice in the peace process. I mean, ultimately it's up to Israel, and Israel makes its decision, and sometimes we feel that they don't listen to us, and we wish they would, but most people feel that way if they don't get their way. But we have we have a left that has moved away from Israel, but we also have this probably the strongest Congress maybe even ever in support of Israel. I mean, the 535 people who are there now, with the exception of a few people who were elected, are quite in support of Israel, as is the American population, and it has somewhat to do with the peace process, but let's locate the source of the problem in the right place. If there were peace, there would still be problems in the U.S.-Israel relationship. There will still be problems in the relationship of American Jews towards Israelis because we're different people under different circumstances with different tribal ways. So I think it's important for us to understand this in that perspective. It's not that because we don't have a voice in the peace process, in my view, there's this great divide. This great divide existed long before, and it'll probably continue. This is just one irritant and one issue that bothers all of us. And I think that...
I think that's right. I just think that our case in maintaining that bipartisan consensus would be aided significantly by an Israel that talks about its aspirations for peace and indeed takes steps to demonstrate that it is indeed serious at pursuing that.
That would help, if they would allow egalitarian prayer at the
that too.
Kotel. That way, a lot of things could help. Okay, let's hear more questions, please.
So a lot of the members of the diaspora, particularly from the U.S., their way of commenting on the peace process is to move into settlements. How does that impact a possible two-state solution?
Okay, you want to comment? Ambassador, you want to comment?
The question was what's the impact of American Jews who move to West Bank settlements on prospects for peace? It's not so much the question of American Jews moving to settlements, it's the settlements themselves. There may be disagreements here on this panel about this. The view that President Obama articulated a number of times, and I think other administrations before the current one have as well, was essentially that settlements make this harder. Now, that doesn't mean every settlement makes it as hard as every other settlement. And it doesn't mean no settlements could be accommodated in a two-state solution. In fact, when President Obama said in 2011 that his vision of the territorial outcome of a peace negotiation would be a solution based on the 67 lines with mutually agreed swaps. The swaps was absolutely intended to do what President Bush had said in a different way 10 years earlier, or 8 years earlier, that settlement blocks near the Green Line, that where the vast majority of the Israeli settlement population is located, could be accommodated into Israeli territory. Palestinians could receive other territory and compensation, and those are not inconsistent with the two-state solution. But other settlements that are scattered throughout the West Bank, far to the east of the separation barrier, do make things harder. And some of those are the more ideological settlements. Some of those are settlements where some of these people move. So it's less a question of their decision to move there. Just, what is the future disposition of those communities, and can it be in any way be accommodated with a map in which there is a functional and viable Palestinian state, again, with all the security requirements and all the other elements of a peace negotiation. My sense hasn't changed that those settlements create difficulties, and the more that no Israeli government has been able yet to declare we don't have future sovereign claims on that area, and the way of demonstrating we don't have future sovereign claims there is to sort of freeze settlement construction in those areas, the more it lends to the credence to the idea that current recent Israeli governments are not seriously committed to a two-state solution long term, with all the concerns that raises.
Okay, we have 10 more minutes, so I'd like to take a few more questions, and then we'll have short questions, short answers. Okay, please.
We've been waiting for quite a while now, almost like waiting for the Messiah, for President Trump peace plan. What do you see that kind of looking like, and how can it possibly affect the state of Israel?
You want to collect questions?
You want to try to? Let me hear a few more. Let's collect a few questions. Okay, over here, please. Yes.
Would you consider being anti-Israel being anti-Semitic?
Okay. Good question. That's a good question. Any other questions? To make a few more. The question was, would you consider being anti-Israel being anti-Semitic? Okay. Are you in college? Well, you're going to be. Okay. Get ready. Anybody else? Any other questions? Yes. Sarah.
Ambassador, you talked about the ways that American Jews can the way that American Jews can express their views. Did you think there was any value to Kerry's request for a great constituency for peace, and how could that how could we act on that in the present and future?
Okay, let's take these last few questions and have our panel respond.
So I can start. I'll try to be brief to what you had mentioned. The Trump peace plan, I think, who knows? It's been delayed and delayed and delayed. If it was ever delayed, if it was ever really a thing, I'm curious what Dan's perspective on this would be as well. How it could impact things is it could create a new marker. I would argue that if we think about the traditional concept from the American perspective of negotiations of an Israeli-Palestinian two-state solution based on the Clinton parameters of December 2000, or even the Olmert-Abbas negotiations, I think it's 2008, right? There is the possibility that the Trump plan could fundamentally create new parameters which are endorsed by some aspects of the Israeli right, but are flatly rejected by the Palestinians, effectively creating new goalposts to be met. That would be my concern, is that it creates a new concept of what a solution should be, one that is nowhere near the zone of possible agreement between Israelis and Palestinians. So in that respect, I think it could have a very harmful role.
I think that we all can agree that Trump is a controversial subject, and we all can agree that the only predictable thing with Trump is that he is unpredictable. But at the same time, I think that what is, from my understanding, what he means is more or less what the Israeli government had in without declarations. We are actually, in a way, separating ourselves from the Palestinians, but not on the ways that the Oslo Agreement founder thought about. We are separating ourselves from the Palestinians in, I would say, in a political way, and not in security aspects. We have a kind of a security control, but at the same time, they are doing whatever they want in the international arena regarding them policies. And more or less, I think this is where we are heading. Since Trump, as I see it, and I know, again, that this is a debatable subject here, since Trump, as I see it, doing some good things for Israel, and at the same time, I wouldn't like him as my president. He's not exactly a role model. I think that we can be more positive regarding his future suggestion. I'm less positive about the reactions that we will see at the days that the Democrats will be again at the White House. I hope that Dan will be there, and then it will be, they will relax. But right now, I am afraid from the reaction. I don't afraid from from some kind of a plan that will force Israel to evacuate the Jordan Valley, which, as I see it, it's a huge risk, or some other plan. So probably it will remain the same place. And the last remark, and it's about what you said. If we agree that peace agreement is not on the table, we all desire, one of the Jewish aspirations is for peace. We educate our kids, even if they're in settlements or in kibbutzim or whatever, they sing, נולדתי לשלום שרק יגיע, how to translate it?
I was born, so peace will come.
Yeah. So we all on the same page regarding the aspiration, the desire for peace. But at the same time, if we understand that it's impossible to reach it, it's not exist. So if you still hold in the same ideas and you just say, let's just deliver the message that it's possible, actually you close the box instead of finding other solutions to bring people to live better and to find other solutions that are not exactly the ideas that we had 20 years ago. And it's not really about the settlements. It's about thinking out of the box.
I mean, maybe touches the question you raised about the constituency for peace. I think Secretary Kerry approached this effort with all the best of intentions and with all due goodwill, with a deep, abiding commitment to Israel and its security that didn't always get conveyed or wasn't always received in the way I think he really felt it. And he may have overestimated the degree to which getting more op-eds written and more letters written and more voices heard by Israelis in support of what he was trying to do, the impact it was going to have in Israel. But, to the points we were making much earlier, it's always legitimate to raise these questions if we feel strongly about them. We should be aware of how much influence they have and where they don't have, but also as a way of reminding Israelis that there is some risk here on the other side of a further distancing of this historic partnership between the American Jewish community and the State of Israel. The think tank I'm affiliated with, INSS in Israel, just published, or is about to publish, a study on the national security, or the contributions to Israel's national security of the American Jewish community. It's funded by the Ruderman Family Foundation, and a very first time really looking in very specific and historic and technical and up-to-date terms about how has the Israeli national security benefited because of the American Jewish community's involvement. And it's immense. And it takes many forms of advocacy and, of course, political support and the assistance and the security relationship and many other aspects. One of the goals is to help Israeli decision makers bear that in mind as they make some of these other decisions, so that at least that security benefit and the risk of losing it is also weighed against some other risks that Yoaz is focused on. Just to address the other two questions, and maybe you'll want to join me on the one over there, is that I'd be very surprised if there's any Trump plan presented. I'm sure they've worked on one. I'm sure that's genuine, but I'm very, very surprised if they present it. We are now heading into what's clearly an Israeli election year. It's an election year no matter what. If it's November, that's the latest it can be. The election may well come earlier. The Prime Minister is facing indictments. There's no conceivable situation in which the Palestinians, if this is a serious plan, let's put it this way, a serious plan, as David and I might define it, that at least looks like a serious attempt to preserve the two-state solution as we've known it, there's no conceivable way Prime Minister Netanyahu in those political circumstances could endorse it, could even say yes, but he'd almost certainly have to reject it. That's not what the president is looking for. If it's not a serious plan, if it's a very, very one-sided affair, which resets the frame of what this end of this conflict looks like in a way no Palestinian could ever accept, they will, of course, reject it immediately. They'd probably do that anyway, but you also wouldn't get the support from the Arab states, who, notwithstanding that they don't care so much about Palestinians, notwithstanding they see Israel as a strategic partner against Iran, are not going to take the political risk of sticking their necks out in support of something that looks like autonomy minus in scattered pockets of the West Bank. So facing that very bleak scenario, and President Trump being a guy who likes to win, I'd be very surprised if they present this at all. A question about is being anti-Israel anti-Semitic. The terms are all very general, so it's hard to, I think, to give you a clear yes or no, but I think I would say this. Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people, as the fulfillment of self-determination for the Jewish people, which suffered gravely through many centuries of statelessness. Also prospered in certain ways in diaspora community, but the reason, the fundamental need for Jewish sovereignty and Jewish statehood is written through the centuries of Jewish suffering and tragedy in the diaspora. And the tie directly to the land of Israel, which is the origin of the Jewish people, which is a historical fact and not something in question. To deny the Jewish people that right, which is, let's say, anti-Israel, if we mean delegitimizing Israel's right to exist, I think does fall in the category of anti-Semitic, because it seems to be singling out the Jewish people for ineligibility for some national self-determination that other nations enjoy. If it's opposition to Israeli policy, if it's criticism of Israeli decisions on Palestinians or on some other policy matter, I'm not sure I'd put that in the category of anti-Israel anyway, but I certainly don't think you would put that in the category of anti-Semitic. It's possible, as many Israelis are, to be critics of policy while being strongly supportive of Israel's legitimacy and existence.
I agree.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to have to wind up. I just want to remind you that there is an expression which I love. People who know me know I love it. I don't know if it's from the Torah, from Uncle Solomon, but it's that all brilliant ideas that always eventually deteriorate into work. So our next session is about work. What do we need to do to move forward? And I hope you'll join us at the final plenary. Thank you.
Thank you.